Imagine that you have lived for years with the person you trusted the most, and then suddenly you find out that you have been deceived all this time. Not some hints, not some hunches, but a brutal reality that ruins your life in an instant. I didn't just find out my wife was cheating. I found out in such a way that she couldn't get away with it. And the worst part wasn't the cheating itself, but how she got away with it, how she lied to my face while I already knew the whole truth. Do you want to know how it happened and what I did in response? Then listen carefully, because my story will shock you. I was rinsing dishes while our 8-year-old daughter, Lila, sat at the kitchen table, coloring a picture of a castle. The radio hummed some soft tune in the background, and the house smelled of freshly baked cookies that my wife, Emily, had pulled out of the oven just an hour ago. It was an ordinary Thursday evening, and yet the weight of something I couldn't quite put my finger on sat in the back of my mind like a pebble stuck in a shoe. Maybe it was work stress. Maybe it was nothing. The sound of Lila's voice pulled me back. "Daddy, Dr. Evans gave Mommy a snow globe," she said casually, adding a swirl of purple to the princess dress in her drawing. Her words sliced through the air like a crack in glass. So subtle, but dangerous once noticed. "Dr. Evans?" My hand stilled under the running water. "Yeah, the one in his office. It's so pretty. Mommy said it's special, but she told me not to tell you." My throat tightened. A sudden rush of cold swept over my skin. She said not to tell me? I managed, keeping my voice steady. Lila didn't even look up. She said it's our secret. She held up the drawing, proudly showcasing her work. "Do you like it?" I forced a smile and nodded. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." But the gears in my head had already started spinning, fast and relentless. Dr. Evans had been our family doctor for years, a trusted name in the household, the man who'd prescribed Emily medication for her migraines and treated Lila for ear infections. Why was he giving her gifts? And why was she keeping them a secret from me? I turned off the faucet and dried my hands slowly, as if the movement would help me gather my thoughts. Emily had mentioned her last appointment with Dr. Evans just 2 weeks ago, claiming she needed a follow-up for her migraines. She'd returned home that evening smelling like vanilla and lavender, her usual perfume, except it seemed heavier than normal. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I didn't think much of anything back then. But now the snow globe had lodged itself into my mind like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Lila hummed to herself as she continued coloring, oblivious to the storm that had just been triggered. I leaned against the sink and stared out the window, watching the wind rustle the trees in the yard. The leaves fluttered like whispers, telling me something I wasn't ready to hear. Emily wasn't home yet. She had texted earlier saying she'd be back late due to a work meeting. Normally, I wouldn't have questioned it. But now, every word of that text seemed like a lie wearing a mask. I stood there for a moment longer, listening to the sound of Lila's crayons scratching against the paper. By the time Emily walked through the door that night, Lila had already gone to bed, and I was sitting on the couch pretending to be engrossed in a football game. My mind, however, was elsewhere, circling back to the snow globe and the secrets tucked into my daughter's innocent words. The front door creaked as Emily entered, carrying a tote bag over her shoulder. Her hair fell perfectly over her shoulders, and she had that calm, composed expression that never gave anything away. She leaned down to kiss my cheek as if everything was normal, but it felt cold, like I was being touched by a stranger. "You're up late," she said, placing her bag on the table and slipping off her shoes. "Rough day." "Same as usual," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't ask further, which was a little disappointing, but also typical. We hadn't been the deep conversation couple for a while. Not since Lila was born, at least. The daily grind had taken its toll on us, and intimacy, emotional or physical, had quietly faded like an old photograph. She headed to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and I watched her, studying every move. It was strange how a small piece of information could change your perception of someone you thought you knew. Every gesture she made tonight seemed choreographed, like she was playing a role in front of me. I considered asking her about the snow globe right then and there, confronting her with Lila's words. But something held me back. Not fear exactly, more like a mix of caution and disbelief. I wasn't ready for the truth if it meant unraveling everything I had built with this woman. For the kid's sake, I had to be sure before I made any accusations. Instead, I took a different approach. "How was the meeting?" I asked as she came back into the living room and sat on the armchair across from me. She took a small sip of water before answering. "It was fine. A bit long, but productive." Her voice didn't waver. "No hesitation. No crack in the surface. And you're meeting Dr. Evans again soon, right?" I asked casually, keeping my eyes on the TV. There. The smallest pause. So brief, I might have missed it if I hadn't been paying attention. She set her glass down on the side table and crossed her legs. "Maybe. He said to call if the headaches come back," she replied, her tone carefully measured. I knew that tone. It was the same one she used when talking to Lila about Santa Claus, soft and reassuring, but covering up the truth. I nodded and leaned back into the couch, letting the silence stretch between us. Inside, my thoughts were racing. Why was she so careful with her answer? Why the pause, the overly smooth delivery? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my instincts were flaring like warning signals on a dashboard. Emily stood up, stretched, and said she was going to bed. I watched her disappear up the stairs, leaving me alone in the dim glow of the television. For a long time, I sat there, staring at the blank walls of our living room and thinking about how fragile trust could be. It wasn't just about the snow globe anymore. It was about the little moments, the unexplained absences, the secretive behavior I had ignored for too long. After a while, I got up, walked into the kitchen, and opened the drawer where Emily kept her odds and ends, pins, sticky notes, and receipts that she never got around to throwing out. I wasn't exactly sure what I was looking for, but when my fingers brushed against a crumpled receipt, I knew I'd found something. I smoothed it out on the counter under the dim kitchen light. It was from a hotel 2 towns over, dinner for 2, dated just last week. The name of the restaurant wasn't familiar, but the thought of her sitting across from someone else at a table made my stomach twist. I placed the receipt back exactly where I found it and closed the drawer quietly, my breathing shallow and controlled. The snow globe. The secret dinner. It was like piecing together a puzzle where every piece was shaped like betrayal. I didn't sleep that night. The walls of our bedroom felt too close, too suffocating, as Emily lay beside me, completely unaware that her lies were starting to unravel. Or maybe she knew, but she was betting on my silence. Either way, the clock kept ticking, and I was stuck waiting for the inevitable explosion. The next morning, Emily woke up before me, slipping out of bed and into her morning routine as if she had no idea the storm brewing inside me. I watched her from the corner of my eye, her back to me as she tied her hair up, humming softly like she always did. I stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. The hotel receipt flashed in my mind, followed by Lila's innocent words about the snow globe. I couldn't ignore the pieces anymore. They fit too perfectly. But confronting her head-on still felt too risky. If I was wrong, I'd tear apart the family for nothing. If I was right, I didn't know what would happen next. By the time I dragged myself downstairs, Emily was in the kitchen making breakfast. Pancakes, bacon, eggs, the usual Saturday morning feast. She always did this on weekends, and for a moment, the smell of syrup and sizzling bacon took me back to the simpler days when I hadn't second-guessed her every word. Lila was at the table, cheerfully talking about school projects, while our teenage son, Ben, scrolled through his phone, uninterested in everything around him. I sat across from Emily, watching her pour coffee into my favorite mug. She slid it across the table without meeting my gaze. The small things started to stand out. How she avoided eye contact. How her hand lingered on the coffee pot a second longer than necessary. How she overcompensated with cheerful conversation. She asked Lila about her homework and Ben about his basketball practice, but her voice had a forced lightness to it, as if she were trying too hard to be normal. I sipped the coffee, pretending everything was fine. "You were up early," I said casually. She nodded, flipping a pancake on the griddle. "Couldn't sleep much. Just thinking about work stuff." Another smooth answer, and I hated how easily it rolled off her tongue. I hated that I was starting to see her as someone who could lie to me with such grace. After breakfast, I told Emily I needed to run some errands. I kissed Lila on the forehead, nodded at Ben, and grabbed my keys. As I stepped outside, the cool autumn air hit me like a slap, but it did little to clear the fog in my head. I wasn't even sure where I was going until I pulled into the parking lot of a nearby coffee shop. I sat in the car for a moment, watching strangers go about their day without a care. I envied them. I envied the guy sipping his latte while reading a newspaper, completely unaware of how fragile things could be. Finally, I pulled out my phone and opened the browser, searching the hotel name from the receipt. It wasn't a luxury hotel, but it wasn't a budget one either, just the kind of place you'd book if you wanted privacy without raising suspicion. My fingers hovered over the screen as I debated checking the restaurant's menu or seeing if they offered private dining rooms. I hated myself for doing this. I hated that I'd become this paranoid version of myself, piecing together evidence like I was in some crime drama. But at this point, what choice did I have? I left the coffee shop without ordering anything and drove aimlessly for a while, the scenery blurring past me as my mind raced. The thought of Emily sharing a meal with someone else, laughing at their jokes, exchanging secret looks, it was like a splinter I couldn't pull out. And the snow globe. Why would a family doctor give my wife something sentimental and tell her to keep it secret? By the time I got back home, Emily was folding laundry in the living room while Lila played with her dolls on the carpet. I watched them from the doorway, and for a brief moment, I almost convinced myself to let it go. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the snow globe was harmless, and the hotel receipt was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. The cracks in our foundation weren't new. They had been forming for a while. I had just been too blind to notice. Emily looked up and smiled when she saw me. Get everything done? Yeah, I lied, forcing a smile back. I walked past her, but her scent lingered, vanilla and lavender, that same perfume she'd worn the night of her work meeting. I clenched my jaw and headed upstairs, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed family photo on the dresser. It had been taken 3 years ago on a vacation to the beach. We looked so happy back then, sunburned, sandy, and completely unaware of the storm that would eventually roll in. I heard footsteps behind me, and Emily appeared in the doorway. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft but distant. "Yeah, just tired," I said, not turning around. She didn't press further. Instead, she walked over, placed her hand on my shoulder, and kissed the top of my head. It felt like a stranger's touch, empty and cold. And just like that, I knew there was no turning back. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and no amount of pretending would change that. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur. I avoided Emily as much as possible without making it obvious. Every conversation felt like a performance, every glance a loaded gun. I kept replaying Lila's words and the hotel receipt in my head until they blended into a toxic cocktail of suspicion. On Sunday evening, I finally caved and searched the house. I waited until Emily had taken Lila to a friend's birthday party. Ben was upstairs in his room, headphones on, probably gaming or texting someone. The house was quiet, and I knew this was my chance. I wasn't proud of myself, but I had to know. I started in the bedroom, opening drawers, checking under the bed, and sifting through her closet. My hands trembled as I searched, half expecting to find something obvious, a love letter, a second phone, or maybe another hotel receipt. But there was nothing, just neatly folded clothes and the smell of fabric softener. Then I moved to her work desk. It was covered with sticky notes, a planner, and random papers that I flipped through quickly. Most of it seemed innocent. Lists of groceries, reminders for the kids' doctor appointments, and work-related notes. But when I opened the drawer on the bottom right, my heart skipped a beat. There it was, the snow globe. It wasn't large, small enough to fit in the palm of my hand, with a miniature scene of a cabin in the woods surrounded by snow-covered trees. I shook it, and the fake snow swirled inside, creating a calm, picturesque moment that felt like the complete opposite of what I was experiencing. Why would Dr. Evans give her this? I turned it over, looking for any markings or inscriptions, but there was nothing. Just glass and plastic, a meaningless trinket that somehow carried the weight of betrayal. I set it down carefully and closed the drawer, my mind spiraling further. What if Lila was right? What if this wasn't just a gift, but a symbol of something deeper, something they share that I've been blind to? I sat on the floor, leaning against the bed frame, and buried my face in my hands. I wasn't ready to confront her, but I couldn't sit back and pretend nothing was happening. I needed answers, and this time, I wasn't going to be subtle about it. When Emily came home later that night, I could hear her laughing with Lila as they walked through the front door. The sound twisted something inside me. I used to love her laugh. It was warm and contagious like sunshine on a cold day. But now, it felt like a cruel reminder of everything that was slipping through my fingers. I stayed in the bedroom, pretending to be asleep when she came upstairs. She slid into bed beside me, her movements careful, as if she didn't want to wake me. I could feel her warmth, but it only made the distance between us more unbearable. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her breathing until she drifted off. Then I slipped out of bed and grabbed my phone. If she was hiding something, I needed to find out where she was going during these so-called work meetings. I scrolled through her recent messages, but nothing stood out, just the usual text to friends, work colleagues, and the school group chat. Frustrated, I opened her email. That's when I found it. An email thread between her and Dr. Evans. Most of it was innocent, discussions about her migraines and medical advice. But then there was one from 2 weeks ago that made my stomach drop. Thanks for last night. It was exactly what I needed. There was no context, no explanation, just that single sentence sitting there, mocking me. I closed the email and sat back, the weight of it crashing down on me. It wasn't proof of a full-blown affair, but it was enough. Enough to know that my wife had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I put the phone down and rubbed my face, trying to process everything. The snow globe, the secret dinner, the email. The puzzle pieces had finally come together, and they painted a picture I didn't want to see. I wanted to storm downstairs and confront her right then and there, demand answers and watch her squirm. But something held me back. The kids. Lila's smile. Ben's quiet loyalty. If I tore a family apart, they'd be the ones caught in the middle, and I couldn't do that to them. So, I swallowed the rage and lay back down beside her, pretending nothing had changed. But inside, something had. The following week was unbearable. Every time Emily spoke to me, I heard the echo of that email in my head. Thanks for last night. It was exactly what I needed. Every time she touched my arm or smiled at me, my mind conjured up images of her with him. The man I had trusted as our family doctor, sitting across from her at dinner, sharing moments that weren't mine to see. I didn't know how long I could keep it together. At work, I was distracted, barely making it through meetings and emails. At home, I went through the motions, playing the role of a husband and father while resentment gnawed at my insides. The hardest part was pretending in front of the kids. Lila still laughed, as if the world were perfect, and Ben still made sarcastic jokes about school. They had no idea their family was on the verge of collapse. By Wednesday night, I couldn't take it anymore. Emily was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables for dinner. The sound of the knife hitting the cutting board was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. I stood in the doorway, watching her, and for a moment, I wondered if she even felt guilty. She looked so calm, so normal, like the betrayal hadn't left a mark on her. I walked in and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "You've been seeing a lot of Dr. Evans lately," I said, keeping my tone casual. She didn't look up. Not really, just the usual follow-ups. The lie rolled off her tongue so effortlessly that it made me sick. I took a step closer. "You sure about that?" This time she paused. The knife hovered over the cutting board, and her shoulders tensed ever so slightly. She set the knife down and turned to face me, her eyes searching mine for any sign of what I knew. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice cautious. I didn't blink. Lila mentioned something about a snow globe. Said you told her not to tell me about it. Her face paled, and she opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. I watched her carefully, waiting for the crack to widen, for the dam to break. It was just a small gift," she stammered. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and foreign even to me. "What I think?" "Emily, I found the hotel receipt. I saw the email." Her eyes widened, and that's when I knew there was no misunderstanding, no innocent explanation waiting to be uncovered. I had cornered her, and she knew it. "Please," she whispered, tears already forming. "Let me explain." But I didn't want her explanations. I didn't need her to fill in the blanks anymore. The picture was already complete, and it was ugly. "How long?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. "How long have you been lying to me?" She covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking as the tears spilled over. "It wasn't supposed to happen. He was there when I felt lost," and her words tumbled out, messy and desperate, like she was throwing them at me, hoping something would stick. I shook my head, cutting her off. Don't try to justify this," she sobbed, but I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for her. All the sympathy I might have had was buried under the weight of betrayal. I thought back to all the times I had trusted her, to the nights when she'd kissed me goodnight while probably thinking of him. "Are you in love with him?" I asked, the question hanging in the air like a noose. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "No, it wasn't like that. It was a mistake, just a mistake." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. My first instinct was to scream at her, to throw something, to make her feel the chaos she'd caused inside me. But I couldn't do that. The kids were upstairs. They didn't deserve to see this side of their father. "You knew what you were doing," I said quietly. "Don't act like it was an accident." She wiped her tears with the sleeve of her sweater, her breathing uneven. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to fix this. Please, just don't give up on us." But I had already given up. The moment I saw that email, something inside me had died. I didn't know if it was love or trust or both, but whatever it was gone. What remained was hollow, a shell of what our marriage used to be. I turned away from her and leaned against the counter, staring at the wall. Divorce. The word kept circling in my mind, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Not because I still loved her, but because of the kids. Lila would cry, and Ben would probably shut down completely. I couldn't rip their world apart, not when they had no idea what was happening beneath the surface. So, I made my decision. "I'm not divorcing you," I said, my voice emotionless. "But this isn't for you. It's for them." Emily's sobs grew louder, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't look at her anymore. The woman I had married, the mother of my children, had become someone I didn't recognize. "I'll sleep in the guest room," I added. "Don't expect anything from me." And with that, I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her to fall apart alone. The guest room wasn't much of a retreat, just an old twin bed we kept for visitors and a lamp that flickered sometimes when the wiring acted up. But it was better than sharing a bed with Emily. At least here, I could breathe without feeling the weight of her betrayal pressing down on my chest. For the next few days, we lived like ghosts under the same roof. The house was eerily quiet, as though it was reflecting the tension neither of us spoke about. Emily tiptoed around me, careful with her words, careful with her presence. She didn't push, didn't try to bring up what I had said that night in the kitchen. Maybe she knew it wouldn't matter. The only time we spoke was for the kids. She would tell me about Ben's basketball practice or Lila's upcoming school play, and I would nod, keeping my responses short. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't warm either. I couldn't be. At night, I lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this numbness would ever go away. Would I wake up one morning and feel something again? Anger, forgiveness, anything? Or was this who I had become now? A man stuck in the gray area between staying and leaving? On Thursday evening, something shifted. Emily knocked on the door of the guest room, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. I didn't invite her in, but she came anyway, closing the door behind her. She stood there for a moment, her arms crossed over her chest, looking smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it was just the guilt weighing her down. "I need to say something," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I sat up, leaning against the headboard. "What is it?" She hesitated, biting her lip like she was trying to find the right words. "I know you don't want to hear this, but I've been meeting with a therapist. I've been trying to understand why I did what I did." I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in her self-reflection. To me, the why didn't matter. She had already burned the bridge. "I never meant to hurt you," she continued. "I know you think that's just an excuse, but it's the truth. I was lost, and I made a horrible mistake." I scoffed quietly, shaking my head. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. She flinched at my words, tears forming in her eyes again. I was getting used to seeing her cry, but it didn't affect me like it used to. The sympathy I once had was buried too deep to dig up. You're right, she admitted, wiping her cheeks. It was a choice, but it wasn't about you. It wasn't because I didn't love you. I was struggling with things I couldn't explain, feeling invisible, feeling like I wasn't enough. And he made me feel seen. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I didn't want to hear about how Dr. Evans had made her feel special. The idea of him filling the gaps I didn't know existed was like a punch to the gut. What do you want me to say, Emily? I asked, my voice low. That I forgive you? That we could go back to the way things were? No, she whispered, shaking her head. I know that's not possible, but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life making this up to you, even if you never forgive me. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For the first time, I saw the depth of her regret, and part of me wanted to believe that she meant it. But regret didn't erase the nights she spent with him or the lies she told me. Regret couldn't rebuild the trust she had shattered. I'm not divorcing you. I repeated, the same words I'd said before. But don't mistake that for a second chance. She nodded, wiping her tears one last time. I understand. She turned to leave, her hand lingering on the doorknob for a moment before she opened it. I watched her walk out, wondering if this was what the rest of our lives would look like. Two people sharing a house, but living separate lives, connected only by the children we both loved. When the door closed behind her, I lay back down, staring at the ceiling again. The numbness was still there, but something about her words left a small crack in the armor I had built around myself. I didn't know if it was hope or pity or something else entirely. All I knew was that the silence between us had shifted, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a warning sign. The days turned into weeks, and life settled into an uncomfortable routine. We acted like everything was normal on the outside, but beneath the surface, our marriage was like a ticking time bomb. One wrong move, and it could all fall apart. I went to work, helped Ben with his homework, and read bedtime stories to Lila. I even sat next to Emily during family dinners, nodding along as she asked the kids about their day. From the outside, we probably looked like the picture of stability. But inside, I felt like I was living someone else's life, like I'd been dropped into a role I didn't audition for. Emily kept her distance, careful not to overstep any boundaries. I noticed the little changes, how she stopped wearing the perfume that reminded me of her work meetings, how she avoided using her phone when I was around, how she left the bedroom door open at night, as if to say, I'm not hiding anymore. I didn't trust any of it. To me, it all felt like damage control. She was trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, and I didn't have the heart to tell her that I saw through it all. Then came the unexpected twist. One night, as I was helping Lila brush her teeth before bed, she said something that stopped me cold. Mommy cried today, she said, her voice small as she rinsed her mouth. She was talking to Grandma on the phone. I think she was sad. I froze, the toothbrush still in my hand. What did she say? Lila shrugged, wiping her mouth with a towel. I don't know. I just heard her say, what if he never loves me again? My chest tightened, but I forced a smile and kissed her forehead. It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's just a little tired. As I tucked her into bed, my mind raced. Emily wasn't the type to cry in front of people, especially not the kids. If Lila had overheard her, it meant she was falling apart more than I realized. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her deal with the consequences of her actions on her own. But another part, the part that remembered the woman I had once loved, felt a pang of something resembling guilt. After Lila fell asleep, I went downstairs and found Emily sitting on the couch with a cup of tea in her hands. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. I sat down across from her, the silence between us heavy, but different this time. Not hostile, not angry, just tired. I talked to Lila. I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. She heard you crying. Emily's lips trembled, and she set the cup down on the coffee table. I didn't mean for her to hear that. I know. I leaned back, running a hand through my hair. What did you tell you, Mom? Her gaze dropped to the floor, and she exhaled shakily. I told her the truth, that I don't think you'll ever forgive me, that I wake up every day wondering if today's the day you'll say you've had enough and leave. I didn't respond right away. Her words hit me harder than I expected, not because they were surprising, but because they were exactly what I had been thinking. I had built this wall between us, but now I could see that she was breaking down on the other side of it, clawing at the cracks, desperate for any sign that I hadn't completely given up. I don't know if I can forgive you, I admitted, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. It's not something you just get over. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. I know, but I'm still here, and I'll keep being here, even if it takes years. I stared at her, wondering if I could ever see her the way I used to. Could I ever touch her without picturing someone else? Could I ever hear her laugh without thinking of the lies she told me? I didn't know the answer to any of those questions, but for the first time, I felt like I didn't need to know right away. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said, my voice steady. But I'm not leaving either. For now, we'll keep going like this for the kids. Maybe one day, things will change. Maybe they won't. But that's all I can give you right now. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with both relief and sorrow. That's enough, she whispered. Thank you. I nodded, standing up and heading toward the stairs. But before I left the room, I turned back. I don't want any more secrets, Emily, I warned. If there's anything else you're hiding, now's the time to tell me. She shook her head quickly. There's nothing. I promise. I wanted to believe her, but the scar she left wouldn't let me. Still, I walked away, leaving her alone on the couch, knowing that this wasn't the end of the story. We weren't healed, and we might never be. But for now, the storm had calmed, and that was all I could handle. In the quiet of the guest room, I lay down and closed my eyes, letting exhaustion take over. The future felt like a distant fog, uncertain and unpredictable. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control over something, even if it was just my decision to stay. And maybe that was enough for now.